So I think what we're going to do next is sort of change the mode a little bit from security to monitoring and logging. So Tiffany, I think you're going to get up and show us a couple of things in the monitoring space.
Yeah, I am going to show some presentation slides, and then you get to ask me to show you stuff.
All right, perfect. So while Tiffany's setting up, let me talk a little bit about why we think this is so important. Obviously, anyone who's running applications, whether they're just running some very basic things in containers or they're running full-blown apps using microservices, it's super important to understand what's happening within each of the running container instances or what's happening within a service that's running as a combination of container instances. So the ability to have visibility and monitor what's happening, monitor what's happening off of those applications, and react to those things if things are going wrong, whether that's in automation or whether that's signaling something larger that may require human action, is super important. Obviously, with Fargate abstracting a lot of the infrastructure from customers, the model for monitoring is going to change and shift a little bit differently. So we want to help customers think through that, talk through that, and we have some great partners that are going to show their solutions on how they're helping customers monitor in this new world where infrastructure is abstracted with Fargate.
Cool.
Tiffany, let's pass it over to you.
Thank you. All right, so yeah, you just heard from, in case you forgot maybe who all you heard from to check out this stuff, go check out what Aqua, Apparato, and Twistlock are doing. So yeah, let's now look a little bit into some monitoring and logging. So we fairly recently added the ability to have container health checks. So before, or still, if you want to get logging or get health checks, one of the ways is using a load balancer. So if you remember from a little bit earlier when I was showing when you were creating a service, it had an option there for having health checks. So then you can define how you want it to be in your load balancer. Now you can also have it as specific to your container. So you don't have to go and create a load balancer for that. You can give custom health checks, and based on those things, you can have certain events happen or have based on like what you're expecting for your health checks. So one of the ways that you can do that, so there is CloudWatch. I mentioned that a little bit earlier for, say, if you wanted to be able to push your logs over to CloudWatch, you needed to have the ECS task execution role. So that one ended up, I had it so it enabled sending things to CloudWatch. So in CloudWatch, you can go take a look at logs, and then you can have the option of CloudWatch events. So say if you have certain events that you want to, things that you want to check on, certain metrics, you can have it so that a certain thing triggers based on certain events that happen. And then you can also take a look at how the service level metrics are. So say if I have a service, I want to go look, how's the CPU looking, how's the memory looking, if something happened to change a lot, you can go and see and get an idea from both like the logging and looking at how the metrics look for that. So another tool we have is AWS CloudTrail. So CloudTrail is enabled by default for Fargate. So what it does is every time that you make an ECS API call, so say if you are doing create cluster, if you're listing your tasks, describing, all those, anything that you would be doing with the ECS API, all those commands get logged over into CloudTrail. So basically they end up having CloudTrail, so there's events in CloudTrail. And then if you look, you can see who submitted it and all the details on that, the time, and then you can also see the entirety of what all is being sent when you take a look at the specific details for it in JSON. We also fairly recently made it so Fargate can use an ECS test metadata endpoint. So basically this makes it so that you can get some of the data and statistics from the tests that you have running if you want to use a third-party tool such as Datadog, which will be they'll be talking after this. But basically with that, it makes it easier so that you don't say, you can't SSH into something you want, and you just want to be able to get the metrics and then having other tools to interact with what you are doing. So, hey Justin, did that make sense to you, or is there any, like, should I show some of these things?
I think you should. I think that a visual, as I said, I'm a visual learner, so I think a visual always makes a little more sense and drives things home.
Okay, so should I start like a CloudWatch logs then maybe?
Maybe. I think that would be a good idea.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. Oh, and if you were watching earlier, the reason that my load balancer didn't work is I forgot to add port 80 to my security group. And as you can tell, you probably can't read that very well, but it's a load balancer and it works, I swear. Okay, so back to this, the logging. So say if we look over at the task, there's one option where you can go and click logs. And then there's also the option of, if I go over to the details, you can go and look into CloudWatch logs. So it will end up creating it. So if I go look at, this one didn't actually have logs enabled, but like say if I go and click on one of my previous ones, assuming that I find one that actually has something in it. So here I have a demo that I did, and this was me failing at doing something with Apache. If I go look at, say, MySQL. Oh, I already looked at that one. If I go look at, say, maybe my first run. So the first run, which I kind of mentioned earlier, you can use that to, if you've never run ECS, Fargate, etc. before. So you can see in here, the one I had, this first run, I was using a web server and it was using HTTPD. So you can see, okay, what command line was being run in there. And so if I also were to go, say, to one of these other ones like Nginx. I keep going to ones that I don't have logging. But so basically, there's a few ways to handle it. So if you are in, if you're creating your task definition and you're using the console on that specific tool, with the auto configure, it will create all the logging groups for you. And if you are trying, if you're trying to create it separately and not doing it by default, or if you're using the CLI, for instance, you can go over to logs. And then you can go and create yourself a new log group. So then when you'll create the log group, and then if you use ECS when you are creating it, you can give that log group that you just created, and then you can give it the specific region that you are currently running your task in, and then you can give it a stream prefix. So say if I were to look at one of these ones here, you can see that it has ECS as the stream prefix, which helps you see, oh, this log is specifically being run from ECS. And you can kind of tell that these look a little bit different for some of them. So the ones that have ECS/ are created by the auto configure. This one here for RexRay, I created that, so I mentioned CloudFormation earlier. So you can set up CloudWatch logging there. So I created a log group in CloudWatch, and it created it with a random part at the end there, so you don't have to worry about if I run this CloudFormation multiple times that it will end up having it be have the same name. And then if I go over to metrics, you can go click on ECS, and so right now I have it for either cluster or cluster service, cluster name. So if I just look at the one that I just ran, you can basically take a look in, say, the last hour, because I've only had it for that long. You can see what percentage of the memory utilization you've used. So this kind of helps, say, if you run a task and you give it a certain amount of CPU and memory, and you see that you're like very much underutilizing it, then you could rerun it, or change how much how much task and CPU and memory to use. That way you can end up saving more money and just not use resources you don't actually need. So then if I also go here, if I look at and then I can also look at CPU utilization, you can see that when it's starting up, how it's using a lot more CPU, and then later it ends up at a certain state as it's just continually running. And then for ones, if you say you make a specific call or a change, you can see that the CPU utilization will end up changing. And you can see all the different ones that have been run before. So like one of the ones that I ran before, you can see that it's also pretty similar. And then you have graph metrics. You can change the details there, give it options, give it, and then you can look over at the source and make changes over there as well. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense.
I think it did. I think it gives everyone a pretty good overview of what CloudWatch can bring to the table. And we're going to actually have another partner come onto stage right now. So while he's sitting up, why don't you join me so we can chat about that. So.
Okay, yeah.